Today we are going to talk about a very important topic. What changes does the food system in India need as incomes rise in India? And we have a professor to explain this to all of us. She's Anaka Aiyar. She's teaching in the US at the University of Vermont. She has written a book about it, and it's on the basis of that book that she is going to tell us what is needed, how should we transform the food system for a rising India. So let's listen to her. Over to you, Anaka.
Thank you so much, Subodh. I'm really excited to be here today. Just wanted to start off by saying that just a little background about me. So as Subodh mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Vermont, and I actually am in the Community Development and Applied Economics Department in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. By training, I'm a health economist, and I'm generally very interested in studying food security and health in developing countries. That has been my focus, with, of course, my passion being India, because that is where I was from before I started my PhD. So a little more about me. Before I did my PhD, I was actually working on the field in India. So after I finished my master's at the Madras School of Economics, I spent a few years in India before pursuing my PhD, working in different organizations in Tamil Nadu at IIT Madras, at the Rural Technology and Business Incubator. And then I worked with the Center for Budget and Policy Studies in Bangalore, Karnataka. And through these different organizations, I had a wonderful chance to travel across multiple villages in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, learning about some of the key issues for rural development challenges that people were facing. And the story of my progress is that back then, when I was on the field, people were talking about this very interesting thing called internet technology and its potential uses for development in rural areas. And we were figuring out through the IIT Madras at that point of time, what were some services that we could provide for rural people to enhance rural welfare and rural development. And at that time, we were still thinking and talking about things like the role of mobile technology and how that impacts things. And when I left India, when I was working at the Center for Budget and Policy Studies, we were still talking about things like how do we tackle undernutrition of people? How should we think about getting healthcare access to people? And these are some policies that I was working on and trying to evaluate when I was there. So fast forward a few years, I finished as I'm working on my PhD. So Subodh, you've had my advisor on your show, Anil Devlalikar, who was working very keenly on topics of undernutrition at this time. But fast forward after that and working in Cornell, I met an excellent team of researchers at the Tata Cornell Institute for Agriculture and Nutrition. And this group had a keen focus on working on India and understanding what drives nutrition in India. And they have a very interdisciplinary team looking at things like sociologists who are part of their team, nutritionists, animal scientists, food scientists, in addition to economists, who work on thinking about these issues and implementing different kinds of projects to address some of these key issues. Again, fast forward a few years later, at Cornell, I started working on this book. Just share my screen. And through these interdisciplinary team and getting exposed to some of the discussions that were happening across the food systems, across these different teams, but also informed from some of my field research that I did in India, we started writing this book on transforming food systems for a rising India. So I just included the QR code here. If anybody's interested, you can just download this book for free. When we wrote this book, our goal was so that it reaches the maximum audience in developing countries, which we know, of course, the main thing is affordability is a challenge. So we made it entirely free for people to access and use. So I hope that you will read it. Okay, so where does this story start? As Subodh clearly mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, India is on a very high growth trajectory right now. We are among the top economies in the world. And we are in the top discussions among the G20, making policies and deciding what's next for the globe as a whole. Now, if you drill down a little further into the India growth story, is an interesting contradiction. So some states in India, so if you look at this graph, you'll see basically GDP on the y-axis, and the names of the different states, per capita GDP. You'll see that some states, Karnataka and onwards, Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh onwards, who are fast developing states and whose growth trajectories, like especially if you look at Delhi and Goa, look more like East Asia and the Pacific and Latin American countries. Now, technically in the development literature, the Latin American countries are considered like the higher end of the emerging economies. And we see that some of these states are slowly catching up and growing really fast towards these. But on the other side of this axis, we see states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, who have per capita GDPs lower than the average in sub-Saharan Africa. So while India has an amazing growth story that we should be extremely proud of, one concern that started this book off was the worry on who are we leaving behind in this growth process. This brought us to this idea about how do we think about food systems for the future? In this situation where we have highly diversified growth, we have high diversity in growth. I'll talk about this as we go along. How should we think about designing a food systems for the future that provides us nutrition security and food security? Now, we in this book identified 3 key areas that needed a sort of a relook. One was looking at the agricultural sector and production and thinking about diversifying production. India, as you know, is known for its exports and staples. It's a highly competitive exporter. And I would imagine that you all have known, and this is something that we felt over here in the US when India decided to reduce its exports more recently, huge price spikes in eating rice in the US. It's become pretty expensive for us to buy rice. So India still determines prices of global rice. So we're very competitive in some kinds of commodities, but not others. And we'll talk about why this poses a challenge for our food system. Second thing, among the great growth indicators, one has to mention about the fact that India has done a great job of reducing hunger and what we call undernutrition, where children are born too small for their age or way too less for their age and gender. And even adult malnutrition, undernutrition is on the decrease. And as we will see in a few slides over here, the book says that we've done a good job about this, but there is a new rising concern in India, which is the problem of overweight and obesity. And how should we think about this? The third thing that we'll talk about is this issue of economic growth, that we have done a great job. So the main hypothesis of this book is that the Green Revolution has kick-started some of this growth that we see across the country. And while we have now moved into manufacturing and services, and these are the key growth areas, because growth has been unequal among less developed states, one of the reasons is because we don't have enough diversified agricultural systems. So in summary, if I were to just take away the main things of this book, what would I say? I would say that in order for us to have food systems of the future that are nutrition secure for all individuals in this high growth phase of India, we have to think about kickstarting a new agricultural revolution in which we bring states who are left behind along with our opportunities for growth. There are some other specific kinds of interventions that I'll talk about, like thinking about smallholder productivity as a key means to improving our growth, thinking about climate-friendly agriculture, given the challenges that climate change poses to our food systems. In addition to things, we need to think about not just reducing undernutrition. A new and key goal for nutrition in India should be improving access to micronutrients and reducing challenges, food system challenges that bring obesity to low-income populations. And one way to do this is thinking of how we can improve our food safety nets to not just tackle undernutrition, but tackle some of these key nutrition issues. And the third thing that I talked about was about the diversification and commercialization of smallholder productions. But more broadly, thinking about how can we link these smallholders with markets through agriculture value chain and aggregation models in ways so that we can better bring economic development that is highly concentrated in urban areas to rural areas. And how do we think about things like agricultural technology in the face of climate change in ways that can also improve rural welfare. So this is broadly the discussions around how we should think about food systems for the future. So if you look at the different chapters in this book, they're organized by these different themes. So chapters 2 and 3 talk about the issue of economic growth and some of the key challenges over there. Chapters 4 and 5 and 6 talk about the issues of nutrition. How do we think about what's happening in terms of diets, nutrition, and consequently, how should we think about safety net programs? Chapters 7, 8, and 9 will talk about agriculture, some of the key issues in agriculture that we face, and how do we think about improving rural welfare so we have a more equitable growth for the future. And chapter 10 thinks about climate change, the broader contours of climate change and how it potentially impacts all these areas, and how can we think of different kinds of interventions that can lessen the burden of climate change on our food system. So in chapter 11, you'll see that we summarize different kinds of policies that we think might be very useful in order to get us towards this more nutrition secure food system of the future, while enabling growth and enabling more equitable growth across the country. So the basic story of our book starts off with this idea that initially there were investments in agricultural productivity that kicked off different trajectories of growth across the country. So on the left-hand side, you see the 1966 district level rice yields. And you see that basically there are some states that are already ahead of these. But post-Green Revolution, you see that there are big changes across some of the high growth states of today, which are the southern states, the northwestern states of the country. So what happens over here, so this is a graph that shows you subnational transformation. Each of these different colors are actually a different state from 1970s up to the most recent per capita GDP. So you have their agriculture share on the y-axis, and you have the net GDP on the x-axis. And what you can see here, what major thing you can take away here, is that as there has been greater growth across the country, you will see that the agriculture share in total GDP is falling, right? So as you move from left to right on this graph, you'll see that overall, when a country like India has been developing, greater and greater agricultural productivity has actually lowered the share of agriculture by allowing states to invest their surplus in other kinds of things like manufacturing and services. And this is primarily driven growth. The second thing you see in this graph over here is that different states were at different levels at this initial level of development, because these, you can see them at, I mean, if you can eyeball them, there'll be a few states here and there, you can see similar colors. Since states started at different trajectories, some states had some institutional advantages, some states had better natural resources, and so these kinds of comparative advantages. These states have really benefited from this transformation and have grown much faster than some of the states, as you can see on the left-hand side, which are the darker blue and darker green colors, which are now left behind. And no points for guessing which those states are, which have been left behind. That is your Bihar and all those states that have less development to begin with. And the ones that have charged ahead with development, if you look at the right side of the graph, are your typical highly developed states right now, what we call the urbanized states of today. So in order to understand, so in this book, we argue that we should not be thinking about India as just, paint India with just one brush, which is that it is India that, we can have one policy for, but we have to start thinking in a little more nuanced way about how to get different states to different levels of development. So we came up with three major classification of states. One is we call the lagging states, who basically have a low productive agricultural sector, currently have low GDPs per capita and low urbanization rates. And these are your typical low-income states that we have today. We have agriculture-led states who have low rates of urbanization, but they have high GDP per capita and very high shares of agriculture in their economies. And these would be typically your states like Punjab, Haryana, Andhra Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh. And finally, is our third type of state is an urbanizing state. So this state has benefited greatly from the Green Revolution, but now they have moved out of the Green Revolution and producing. This is not their key focus anymore. And they have invested in a new comparative advantage, which is in manufacturing and services, and greatly benefited from global growth and joining the global economy. So this would be your states like Kerala, Goa, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Karnataka, Telangana, and Uttarakhand. So when we think about policy, our book argues that if you want to have an India that is growing and that is growing equitably, we need to start thinking about policy that can tackle specific issues that each of these different groups of states face, rather than coming up with one broad stroke type of policy that tries to address India as a whole, because the story of India has now become a story of these different states and their experience of growth. So the second thing, that one of the other key insights from this book is that it's an interesting thing to see now that and this is something that actually is a fact of development, is that as countries become, or in this case, as states become more developed, when I say developed, that they have higher rates of GDP per capita, they move out of agriculture, there's greater and greater amounts of urbanization. Basically, people are moving out of farms, moving into urban areas to get jobs. That's one reason. But because of the different nature of manufacturing and services that require agglomeration, now these urban areas start developing as engines of growth. And consequently, we see more more population living in urban areas. So if you look on the graph on the left-hand side, all these are those highly red pockets versus the yellow and green pockets where urban populations are much lower. Now, the graph on the right-hand side actually plots another very interesting relationship we have with the food that we eat. Now, fact of the matter is, as our incomes grow, spending of our income on food decreases, right? So obviously, when people are extremely poor, they might spend a large portion of their budget on food. But as people get richer and richer, then they spend a lower proportion of their budget on foods, and they focus on other kinds of goods that they have access to. Now, in this graph over here on the right-hand side, we make this distinction on what people are eating by rural and urban area over time. Over time, we know that basically income has been increasing. And consequently, we see that there has been a shift away from spending too much on our food. A second and more important point is that as our incomes are increasing over time, we are demanding more and more diverse diets. So if you looked at that blue, the darker blue, the bottommost, the cereal and products part of the graph, you see that as time has changed, it is becoming a much smaller share of our budget. Some of it could be explained by the fact that we receive subsidies to buy this in the PDS and so on. But the fact of the matter is, world over, the very important phenomenon that we have seen and observed is that as incomes increase, people want more dietary diversity, right? People want more different kinds of food, not just cereal and products. They want different kinds of food. And you can also see that this growth is much different in rural and urban areas. In urban areas, because of higher levels of economic growth than rural areas, you see these differences looking a lot more stark than you do with rural areas. And if you just look at those changes over time. So this is another key challenge for India. We're becoming more we're becoming more urban, and we're demanding more diverse diets. And a lot of this demand of more diverse diets is coming from urban populations, which is a key challenge for our food systems for the future. Now, here is a graph to show you what happens when supply doesn't keep pace with demand. So on the left-hand side is the per capita availability of different types of foods. And you can see that basically we have done a good job of supplying rice. But on the right-hand side, what you can see on the other hand is that you can see that as demand increases, prices of products have been increasing over time. All prices are increasing, but the main thing to take away is that certain kinds of food, that diverse foods, for example, like vegetables, like fruits, like milk, have a lot more volatility in the prices than do other kinds of commodities. And one reason for this that we argue is that some of these cereal and pulses which are provided through the PDS, which controls the prices, But this is the same kind of fresh fruits and other kinds of goods are not provided by the PDS in all states, which creates an link, which basically creates this volatility that we see. The main issue of having volatility is not that it is a problem in and of itself, but the people who are who are the worse off when there's a lot of volatility is the poor. Right. So this is the concern over here, that it's not just that prices are rising and demand is increasing, but there is a higher level of price volatility of different kinds of important foods like fruits, milk, eggs, and fish and meat. And the people who need them the most, the poor, are not able to access these because of this volatility and the fact that they're not provided in the PDS. So a big takeaway for this book is that as India is growing, we don't leave states behind. We start thinking of more diverse diets, but we also think about not leaving people behind. And a key way for not leaving people behind is still our safety net programs. So one suggestion that we make is thinking about diversifying our food-based programs away from just staple grains, including more diverse diets into those, thinking more broadly about diverse diets and how to deliver more diverse foods to populations. Another big thing that we discuss is delinking this idea of food grain procurement with a food-based safety net. We, especially in the country like the US, for example, food grain crop subsidies are given, and this is a completely separate program from actually the safety net, which is a cash-based safety net in the United States. And if we can do something similar in India by delinking the two, we might be in a better off situation to get more people covered, according to our book. And finally, if we can look beyond just food-based safety nets, are there some alternatives to think about? For example, what may be the role of health insurance in protecting families against health shocks? Because there is evidence to suggest that having good insurance programs allows family to invest more in their food security. Alternatively, considering things like cash-based food safety nets. One argument is that maybe it is better off to give people cash so they can go to the market and buy the kind of food that they want. But evidence from the US will suggest that it is not such a straightforward outcome, that it is entirely possible that even if you provide people cash for food, they don't necessarily improve their dietary quality. But still, it's important for us to think about how we can solve the problem in India while focusing on what is important in these different types of states. So for example, in our book, we go a little more deeper, like in lagging states, in more urbanizing states where people have a lot more education, more independence, and they maybe cash-based safety nets is a solution over there, and health insurance is a solution over there. But in a lagging states where we have we have low literacy, maybe the PDS is still the solution to this problem. But as a country, we need to think more carefully about all of these safety nets. It is well worth mentioning that this is between 2005-06 and 15-16, and given the fact that the 1920 to the NFHS, the National Family Health Survey 1920 happened just before the pandemic, we do see some reduction in underweight. So I would say that these are not changed much. But just in those 10 years, between 5-6 and 15-16, the percent of overweight Indians has doubled. And that means the BMI is about 25 over here. The WHO recommends, especially has found, that these lower levels of BMI, like 25 and above, Asian populations are at much higher risk of non-communicable diseases. Now, the reason I mention this is that in the same time period, if you look at the data on health, mortality in India from non-communicable diseases has also doubled, right? So we have increased obesity, we've increased mortality from non-communicable diseases. And the question is, how prepared is our health system to address this issue? Here is how it looks by different types of states. Very clear picture, a lagging state is definitely still struggling with the issue of undernutrition, but this is not so much of an issue for high ag and high urbanizing states. And on the left-hand side, where you look at the graph on undernutrition versus underweight women versus overweight women, the development story is clear again. You can see that states with lower GDP per capita have very high rates of underweight women, but also low rates of overweight women. And that changes as we go through the development process. Now, the problem with this is not overweight itself. The problem is, why are people with lower income, which is what we find in more new research, more susceptible to these changes in development? And why is the key nutrition challenge for them becoming from undernutrition to overweight in such a short time, in 10 years? And that is where the role of markets, the role of the food environment in which people are situated seem to matter. In more recently, I have a paper that looks at the role of processed foods. And we find that in India, especially in Bangalore, we have the field studies from Bangalore, that it's not necessarily that people are eating more of like junk food, but among those who are more overweight, we see higher levels of semi-processed foods like oils and sugars in their diets as the key correlate for obesity in those households. So what people are eating, the food environment, why is the food environment changing so rapidly that we are now moving from undernutrition to overweight in such a short period of time, is also a concern for India to think about, given the context of the fact that we are more at risk for non-communicable diseases. This raises the larger question on how prepared are our health systems, and what can we do to reduce the burden on our health systems. So for the food safety net chapters and the nutrition chapters, we basically summarize that there were some certain kinds of interventions that might be, things to think about, not just stopping at things like cash transfer and health insurance, but also thinking more in terms of some of these interventions are already being done. For example, behavior change and taxes for unhealthy food. These are still being considered in our policy landscape, but thinking more deeply about this and how can we get a population to adapt more or better nutrition behaviors is something we seriously need to think about if we want India to continue down this fantastic trajectory that it's on. The other thing that we need to think about that's also related to nutrition is how do we think about a green revolution 2.0, so to speak, where not only are we thinking about getting more incomes to farmers, but also increasing local food production diversity so that we can cater to this rising demand for better and more nutritious quality and more nutritious and more quality foods in the food systems. So that brings us to some of our discussions on the agriculture sector. As I mentioned before, demand has been changing. Urban areas are driving demand for more dietary diversity. So the book then looks at what are some issues with getting more diverse, what are some issues with diversifying the food production system? What are the current policies in place that prevent this from happening? Second is, if we want this to happen, how can we do it? Is the key issue limited access to technology, or is it limited access to credit? How should we think about diversifying these markets? And also thinking about things like what are some transaction costs among smallholders, and what do these transaction costs do to prevent them from accessing the increasing the new value chains that are being created by this huge increase in urban demand for diverse foods. So in our book, one of the solutions that we think is important is strengthening the already available cooperatives and farmer producer organizations, and trying to identify, basically strengthening them in order to improve their marketing, in order to improve the kind of access to resources that they have, in order to basically get more value to farmers, but at the same time link them to the growing demand that we see across the country. And we have different kinds of interventions for the different kinds of states. I won't spend too much time over here, but the main takeaway for us is that what is the best way? How should India be thinking? What is the best way for us to diversify beyond staples? Should we think about new types of breeding technologies that improve yield, nutrition, and resilience? For such a tiny country, if India is one of the top exporters in the world, when I say tiny, I mean relative to the US, of course, it's not a tiny country. Relative to the US, we are one of the largest exporters of rice across the world. If we can do this for rice, why can't we do this for any other grains? So what do we need? What types of technologies do we need to move in that direction? What can we think about in the future on the role of ICTs and big data? And how can that help our farmers transform food systems to be more responsive to the growing domestic needs for more dietary diversity? So these are some things that we explore. So finally, one thing that we know, and it's an important discussion also, is the role of climate change. Now, as you can imagine, climate change is bringing new and very difficult challenges to any sort of growth strategy that we will implement. In agriculture-led states, we have huge issues of water scarcity that are beginning to threaten our current systems. The question is, across the country itself, there are new challenges with unpredictable rains. I mean, we have all experienced this in some way with the flooding and the droughts and so on. So how should we think about making our food systems resilient in the face of these new growing challenges? So we take what we call a technology plus approach, in which we think that it's not just important to think about technology, but we also need to think about policies and climate change policies that identify technologies that can help make our systems resilient, but also focus on consumption. And finally, also focus on how can these technologies and these initiatives for conservation also include community action in ways that can improve climate change, our resilience in the era of climate change. We also think that there is a role for the private sector, for example, to participate in some of these things, and with the appropriate type of policies, they can be incentivized to develop technology and also increase community participation. From our analysis at the time that we wrote the book, and this may have changed since, we found that some of the climate change policies and the climate adaptation policies, though ahead of their times when they were written in 2008-9, had not been fully updated. So it really requires India not just to design better growth policies, but think about growth in the context of climate change if we are to sustain this growth in the future as well. So in total, let me summarize what this all means. So one, for the future, and if we want to be a transformed food system that provides nutrition security to all in our country, the thing we have to deal with is intra-country diversity in growth patterns. And within this context, we need to think about how to manage India's nutrition transition, which is now moving from undernutrition to overnutrition. And the way we think that this can be achieved is through improving food system diversity. The reason why food system diversity is also important is because it will cater to the rising urban demand for food and food diversity. And by linking food diversity, the demand for food diversity, we can also create more opportunities for smallholder farmers, and thus also facilitate greater rural welfare. Some other things that we discuss in the book is to move away from staple grain policies and think about more non-staples. We want to think more broadly about food safety nets and its role in ensuring food systems diversity, while also not forgetting the small farms and the producer groups who can be very key to reducing transaction costs and improving a smallholder welfare. And finally, the big takeaway is that any sort of growth policy that we come up with, any agriculture policy we come up with, any nutrition policy that we come up with, has to not only examine all these interlinkages, but has to think about how we can deal with climate change. And finally, the book highly recommends that while it is important for us on a global scale to have an India growth model, while we are thinking about growth within the country, we have to think more seriously about what are the individual state-related issues and identify policies that can address state-level development in a way that we can share this wonderful growth that we are experiencing across the country, across all states and all people. So with that, I'll stop and I'll be very happy to take any questions. This is my email address. If you have more questions and you want to stay in touch, please let me know. I would love to continue any conversations we start.
Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot today, and let's not waste time. Let's go to the young discussants. Let them have their time. Shubham, you are first, so please go introduce yourself and then go.
So, hello, my name is Shubham.
Can we get rid of the shared screen? Yeah, okay, go ahead, Shubham.
So, first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Shubham, and I recently graduated from Delhi School of Economics. And I'll be joining, and I worked as a research analyst in Institute of Economic Growth for 2 months. And I'll be joining Amazon as a business research analyst in January 2024. So, ma'am, first of all, thank you for such a comprehensive presentation. So I learned a lot, and there's an irony in the situation that in India we see that there's undernutrition and there's also overnutrition, and as you are saying that we are over the time we are urbanizing, and our food baskets are changing. So there's also a growing demand for diverse food baskets. I just wanted to ask the role of government in incentivizing farmers to produce certain crops. Like if we talk about MSP, so government the MSP is set in a way that certain crops are they get more certain crops they get more what should I say that the farmers are incentivized to grow those type of crops like wheat and rice, and we have seen that this is also imposing climate there's imposing over exploitation of water resources in Punjab. And I wanted to also say that the benefit of this MSP is not is only seen in certain states, like only the farmers of certain states like Punjab, Haryana, they get the benefits of this MSP, and most of the farmers in India are marginal farmers. So I read in a paper that only 68% of the farmers are able to sell their only 68% of the 68% of the farmers are not able to sell their produce at the MSP. So how can government change its policy of this MSP so that it incentivizes farmers to produce the crops which are more diversified, which are more micronutrient rich? So what are your views on that?
So Subodh, shall I answer that question?
Yeah, please.
First?
It's a direct question to you.
Okay. So you have made some really excellent points, and this is exactly what we discuss in the book, in the sense that we think that so just like the government initiated the Green Revolution, there was so much support for the Green Revolution. They introduced the varieties of food. They came up with will help you support with the input technology, will also help by controlling the prices in the market and so on. It's not as if India can't do it. It's just that we have been just locked into this trajectory and we just are not able to get ourselves out of it. But like you said, the times are changing, demands are changing. The staple policies have helped some farmers over others. So we know they can work. We know for a fact they can work. So why not have a more diversified system? Why not we think about innovation on millets, right? We are discussing about this. I think that there is a growing understanding in the urban markets. And if you talk to my parents, they're eating more diverse foods and wanting more organic food. So it's not as if people are not aware and people won't be interested in this. It's just that we have got locked into this trajectory and somebody just needs to break that cycle. So we have the will, we have the resources, we have the talent to make all these changes. We've done it once with the Green Revolution, so why not? And unfortunately, it's just like the system is a bit stuck. So that's what is the point that we make in the book, that it's important, the times are changing, and we should change with the times. And the way we do it is what we talk about, diversifying our food system through reducing our focus on what you called the rice and wheat, a staple grain policy. We need to move away from a staple grain policy and think about a more diversified food system. And it's possible. We can do it. And in fact, one of the things that we argue in this book is that if we actually stop this focus on staple grains, maybe there is a potential for what are now lagging states to pick up some of the slack. Maybe Bihar, instead of producing rice and wheat, can produce something it's better at. Maybe they are better at producing millets. Maybe they are better at producing vegetables. And by just locking all the farmers in Bihar with just this MSP on rice, we are actually doing a disservice because they are not able to benefit. So that is what we argue, that yes, we need to break the system. And the way we do this is basically offer new types of policies that can actually support diversified production, farm production.
So,
ma'am, just one more point.
Yeah,
Ma'am,
go ahead.
I've seen that. Sir, can I say? So,
Yeah, please.
So
Shubham,
over
go
the
ahead.
years, MSP of pulses is also rising. And in a way, if government is incentivizing farmers to grow more pulses, but still we import pulses from the global market, and we are not able to meet our consumption demands. So, ma'am, is this MSP policy is this policy should be revamped or something like that? What would you say about this policy? What's the future of this policy, or what kind of policy should India adopt?
So we cannot just think about it as the market price and like fixing the market price and incentivizing farmers this way. We cannot have a single policy that says, I'll just give you a market price, grow what you want. We need to provide support and policies along the entire supply chain, right? So, okay, pulses is not as perishable as fruits and vegetables. So you can tell a farmer, I'll give you MSP for fruits and vegetables, but if you don't have a supply chain, it's useless. What will you do with all the fruits and vegetables? They'll go rotten quickly, and then you can't reach the markets that you do. So policy doesn't just include MSP. They have to think about it from the perspective of, can we grow this fruit and vegetable? What is a climate resilient technology that can help us grow this fruit and vegetable? From there on, from the farm gate to the consumer plate, what are the innovations and policies that need to be made so that we can reach it to the customer in time? Right? And if we can actually achieve this, then obviously the customer will be willing to pay for, you would be willing to pay for fresh fruits and vegetables if it came from your local neighborhood farmer and who's the quality you would trust, right? So in that particular case, you can directly pay the farmer, right? And we have in some way incentivized the farmer, both from consumers buying more of this, but also ensure that there are no issues along the supply chain to deal with this. So it's not just MSP. We need policies along the entire supply chain. We need to think very strategically and carefully around policies along the supply chain to solve this problem. MSP is only one thing. Like I said, you can give farmer MSP on fruit and vegetable, but that won't change production if you don't change the rest of the supply chain. That's number one. Number two is a lot of the discussion around MSP and those kind of things are also sort of cloaked in the larger world debates on, India as a producer of the reason why some of these staple grain we're stuck on these staple grain policies is because we're a huge exporter. We are known for this. We don't want to change this because it's kind of the trajectory we're on. So there may be some global issues and global politics that also plays a role on this. But in general, I agree. It's not as if it's not possible. It's just that it's not done.
Ma'am, because most of the farmers are not even selling at MSP. Only certain big farmers are selling at MSP, and they don't. The marginal farmers over who comprise of 85% of the Indian farmers, they don't even sell at MSP. They sell to their village traders. So
Exactly. Exactly. So
I
it's not
don't
a
get
simple,
it.
it's not an easy problem to solve, because there you are talking about the other issue we bring up is that we are thinking about it from the smallholder perspective. Because in our book, we are taking the sort of the position that the large farmers can sort it out for themselves. Like they will be able to best, utilize these policies. So how do we get more growth to small producers? And so we think the channel there is more cooperatives. We think that having aggregation models in which a small group of farmers can work together so that they can increase their market power, so they can demand better prices for the quality of food that they that they actually produce is important. But to solve that problem, you also need to think about the supply chain, right? You need to think about, when farmers are selling their produce, who is doing the grading and sorting, who's thinking about food safety. All of these policies also need to be fixed. So right now in India, it's pretty haphazard. There's no such, it's kind of market to market. The trader will tell you this is not good quality, you just have to throw your food, right? There are no standards for us to actually so standards, so that farmers can say, no, hey, you're giving me a bad deal, this is not the standard. There's nothing for them to actually fall back on. So these are also some of the policies that have to be changed on the supply chain. So MSP is not the only solution. We don't think it's the only solution. If we have to rethink development, we need to rethink farming and productivity. And that requires us to take a more local approach. So why should India design what Bihar is good at? Why should India think about what Karnataka is good at? Karnataka should think what Karnataka is good at, and whatever. So that is what
agriculture should be a state subject. Let the states decide. And
it should not. It is. But of course, these politics of these things are, of course, a lot harder to, understand and get around. But yes, in principle, if you just take an economic view, then yeah, these things should be done.
Sir, you are muted. You're not audible.
As you know, Pranita, it's your turn. Let's go, please.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. But how I would like to see the food security and things is like, when we tend to say India is self-sufficient in grain production, or India, in the macroeconomic perspective, everything appears great, but the structural change, urbanization and all, it tends to have more challenges at the ground level. So what I am thinking is, probably we should look at it integrating the employment aspect as well to the food security. Because when we say, okay, we are good at producing the sufficient amount of food that we need, but when we are saying the National Food Security Mission and everything, all the PDS and enough subsidies are given, enough food is given in terms of rations and everything, are people actually able to afford to buy the other part of the food that they're not able to getting? And also, additionally, you have actually answered through your presentation to one of the painful questions that I have for myself when I think of food security, is because also when we say, like, there needs to be diversity in the crop production systems itself, but I am thinking, are the farmers who are actual producers of food within the rural areas, are they food secure? If they diversify more of their production, probably we are saying India is able to export rice more, wheat more, and everything. But if they are diversifying their production, the marketed surplus would become less. That would have impact on the uh, at a larger scale as well, right? So yeah, the small farm aggregation models and integration to farmer producer organizations, I think that seems like an excellent way out of it. So that, I mean, when small farms are like pooled and aggregated, so that there would be enough marketed surplus, just like other staple food grains. Yeah, but I like to think by integrating it with the employment aspect as well, whether how we can improve the labor productivity. Also by structural transformation, whether are we meaning people come out of agriculture, or are we meaning the structural transformation in terms of improving the productivity of agriculture by intensifying the, what do we say, machinery usage and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so I see some clarification questions and some other questions. Look, so first is when we think about structural transformation, we mean not just moving out of agriculture, but moving out of agriculture because agriculture has gotten so productive, right? We don't no longer have things like underemployment in agriculture. People are working at their highest capacity, people are getting paid, and then whatever surplus labor then moves into urban areas. That is how we think about structural transformation. So we don't think structural transformation is not this situation where we just all of us move to manufacturing and services and don't think about agriculture, but we do it in a way that is, when agriculture is extremely highly productive, there can be less people participating in agriculture and more people who can benefit from these non-farm sort of occupations. So in our book, we don't say that agriculture is the only way out. So we think it's important to have good jobs, and not just not just any non-farm job, but good quality non-farm jobs. We shouldn't have, situations where people are just working in an urban area, but they're still struggling with urban malnutrition, those kind of things. We don't want jobs like this. We want jobs that bring dignity to people. We want jobs that bring better incomes to people. And we think that this is an important aspect of the transforming food systems argument. There are multiple levels of inequality if you think about what I said. One is state level, Bihar versus Karnataka. Second is rural versus urban. Third is, even within rural, who is the person who's losing out? Small versus large farms. Versus urban, who are you thinking about? The urban poor versus the urban rich, right? There are multiple levels of inequality that need to be addressed in India. And just thinking about, though it's a big picture book, so we talk more about it in terms of comparison of states. But the fact of the matter is, we have to think more deeply and more clearly about some of these things. So if you think about the safety net recommendation that we have, we say that safety nets are important. We should not just have people getting access to food because affordability is an issue, but can we use these urban safety nets to deliver better nutritious food? Why should we just give rice and grain and sugar and oil, right? Why not give fresh fruits and vegetables? Why not think about it? One option is, okay, one argument against the PDS is that, there's a lot of corruption and people doesn't reach people. So then we say, okay, if that's the case, then do you want to instead give people cash in their hand? Let them go to the market and buy what they want. That's fine too, right? If that is a problem that you face and the PDS is not doing a good job. Or alternatively, hold the government accountable. Say that, okay, we want a better PDS. What other policies can get to a better PDS? So we don't drill into many of these issues too deeply, but these are important issues and we address them and we think they're important as we talk about it in the book as well. But each of these things we think are important to the state. Is Tamil Nadu doing a good job addressing its PDS issues, right? This is not the problem of central government, whether Tamil Nadu is doing a good job or not, right? But Tamil Nadu should take the responsibility of addressing this issue. Secondly, if you think about more rural areas like Bihar, what is the point in having better urban safety nets? We're still figuring out rural safety nets, right? So that is a decision that some of these states have to take on what is their priority. And instead of the government saying, everybody fix your PDS, right? What's the use in saying that? We need to know the Tamil Nadu story, we need to know the Bihar story, and each of these states need to be supported. We think that the federal government is still important and the central government is still important, but needs to be supported in achieving these specific goals for the individual states. I think I've covered your questions, but if I have not, happy to answer.
Also, I would like to say, like, probably it is our responsibility to challenge that ill-informed and established narrative, like the only way to make countries progress is coming out of agriculture, or by improving the industrial growth or manufacturing sectors and things like that. Thank you so much.
Okay, good, Pranita. Okay, Kai Balyapati has been waiting very long. It's very late at night, but He's doing PhD, so sleeping before 2 a.m. is not possible anyway. So let's go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for the, very interesting presentation. And I really like the book, and I want to congratulate you and the other authors for this, excellent contribution to the field. The discussion so far and in the book has been, as you said, in the macro sense. I belong to one of the states that, the book categorizes as a lag state. I'm from Odisha, and I'm from a village background as well. So I have been in such situations, and I have personally, encountered things like this. In my, duration of life till now. So I would like to, add the human perspective to it that I think we need in our policies. So when we are having, I recall one of your graphs in the regarding the APMCs in chapter 8, where you are saying about that how farmers are not getting the right price of their produce. So, I will just give you one real life example situation. So in our village market, at morning 8 p.m. on Tuesday and Saturday, the situation is like this, that there are two different tiers of markets are getting formed. At morning 7, you go the wholesale, the sellers, they are selling the products to the retailers who will be sitting throughout the day to sell their produce to the end buyers. And the other one, the buyer who is going to the market, for him or her, the market is open from 10 to 3 p.m. on the usual market hour. So the thing that I'm trying to raise here is that the reason why the farmer suffers is that the farmer cannot sell. And if you go and ask a individual farmer that if their family has the support of having a shop in their village to sell whatever they're producing, they're definitely going to get more price than what they are getting currently right now. And to be honest, these policies of MSP and green revolution and things like that, they need, I think, more introspection in terms of how they are dealing with a variety of masses. So we can say that we need to have more diversity in terms of the cultivation patterns, and in terms of the crops or vegetables that we are cultivating, definitely based on the earnings that can give, that they can give based on the climate pattern and things like that. But the small and medium farmers are in huge numbers in these states, to be honest. And I'm talking about Odisha, and there is one festival in which you are supposed to eat the rice made of the paddy from your field. So what I'm meaning here is that there is a cultural and sociological background to what they are doing it. So when things are connected in such a way, then they tend to do the same sort of cultivation over and over the years, and that impacts their earning and the soil and everything. And to be honest, the MSP thing does not work really well, because we need to address the APMC dealers thing also. Like if you see, before the MSP and the APMC thing came into force, those people who were working as the middlemen, like in your particular the diagram that I just mentioned about, they are actually now formalized in form of the APMC Act. The same people who are acting as the middlemen, they are now holding the APMC dealerships right now, and they have the political background, and they have the clutch over there. So what happens is that they will complain to you about that if you take away the gap that we are getting from what you are giving to the farmer and what you are giving, while selling it in the market, then from where will we get our income? So their share of income, they want to increase it over time, and at the end of the day, the last man, the farmer, ends up suffering. And to be honest, for this, not only they are responsible, the way the country is going, that does have a significant impact on all sort of portions of the society. And that can be replicated in a way that we say that they give paddy and wheat and sugar and different forms of help to the people who are from poor BPL, below poverty line backgrounds. But if you go and check, then most of the people are actually going and selling them in the village market on days of their convenience to get other products as well. So what I'm meaning here is that the plans that we are having to target and to improvise on the existing situation of these farmers, because I don't think without improvising their ground reality, we are not going to change the reality of the country as a whole. That will be a dead dream, to be honest. And in such states and over time, this becomes a practice. And when that becomes a practice in a human behavior that turns into a hobby, it's really difficult to have something striking. I mean, on that aspect, that will change and revamp the entire structure of the economy. And we can talk about the structural change and things like that, but what I think is like without addressing the human factor of it, we will be halfway around. And to be honest, the way you talk about the signaling, price signaling aspect in your book, I think the quality level, where I think this is APMC Act and the MSP, whatever the government planning is having, if the government can assign a particular price level to a particular farmer's product, if there can be some agent, then that secures a lot to the farmer. First of all, it signals to the dealer that their product is of some value. Then that saves the farmer from the further coming scope of manipulation. And that definitely acts as a different sort of safety net that can encourage the farmer to go on producing the same product and selling them at a better price in future. So things like I think behavioral interventions are currently more of importance to get effective results that we are actually aspiring of. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think thanks for sharing this. I think it's important. And I think that as practitioners of research, and we're all doing PhDs or masters, and bringing these sort of on-field experiences and challenges are very important to inform research. And I really hope that you will continue doing this excellent work and going back and talking to your people that who are experiencing some of these things, and coming back and informing some of the research that other people are thinking about, or even hopefully that is informing the research that you develop. Now, in terms of the kinds of price subsidies, just to give you a sense of how it works in other countries, in the US, for example, initially they had the policy of the price supports, like how India we have price supports. But they eventually figured out it was creating a lot of problem of overproduction. And they couldn't, so they were doing it to protect farmers against falling prices, and eventually, but it was creating these perverse incentives of increasing production, because farmers knew that whatever they produced, they would always get the price on. So more recently, some of the other things that they have tried is give farmers an income subsidy of some sort. So base it on their base acreage of their farms. They give them a particular price for a product that they would have grown as just a safety net. Regardless of what happens in the market, you get that. That's one thing they've tried. Another thing that's becoming a big thing in the US is also crop insurance, right? Now, the idea is that when farmers do very well, the problem with farmers is that they have a two problem. One is that when they have a lot of production, it causes a depression of prices in the market, and then they lose out. But then when there's also a weather shock, that affects their production, and that also affects their incomes. So it's like this weird situation is where it's no win-win. It's basically a lose-lose for a farmer in any kind of situation. So the US has come up with what they call crop insurance programs, in which you have to pay a premium, small premium. The US government supports that premium. And then if there is a crop failure, and they have different actuarial sciences to compare whether this crop, how much they'll pay out for this crop failure and store, or when is it a crop failure, they actually cover their income losses from that. So that is also another type of thing that has been tried out before. So again, in India, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are creative and innovative, who can come up with really important local solutions that might address these issues. And it is important for the government to be responsive to those and learn from those, can be learned. So maybe it's possible in India that crop insurance doesn't work and income subsidy work, whatever it is. There should be an openness to doing research and learning from researchers to understand what is the best way we can enable more development even at the local level. Right? Again, it should not be that a government says one MSP for the whole country. Like, why? Like, Why not think about the specific Bihar issue that is addressing that specific farmer and come up with a policy that designs? It's not like we lack experts or people who can think about these things. All of you are young people. You're obviously thinking about these issues and passionate about these things, right? So I think we need that openness. We need to create an atmosphere of research, engagement, constant back and forth that I think is very important to the development process as well. So yeah, thanks for raising this. I think it's important, and having a really local field perspective is so valuable in this day to day. And my wish is that all of you get more involved in thinking about these things. After all, it is the future of it. You are the future of India, so it is better that you start early and start thinking about these important issues.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wants to say anything before I say a few things? Anybody else? No, okay, well, okay. I'm not an ag expert, but so I will restrict myself to broad comments, and the 2 points. First, I fully agree with the notion that it's up to the states. In 2019, I wrote on Quora.com my slogan, wake up, wake up, wake up. It's not the PM, it's the PM plus CMs. It's not the PM alone, it's the PMs, it's the PM plus CMs. And many people know that as one of my standard slogans. In 2021, I wrote a book, India 2047, 2021, and in it was a recommendation that we need to focus. I mean, I divided the states into the kind of things that you are talking about, and the lagging states I divided into 5 of the more promising lagging states, and I didn't say anything about the others, and those 5 were West Bengal, Assam, Rajasthan, Odisha, and Madhya Pradesh. And then last year, I decided to set up an NGO. I'm not a practical guy, so I'm just a thinker, which would actually work to develop the small towns and the surrounding rural areas in 3 of the states we are beginning, Rajasthan, West Bengal, and Odisha. And we have made 3 trips to a small town in Odisha called Shuri. It's the capital of Birbhum district. Nobody knows it. That's the whole point. It's 1 lakh population, and the surrounding area, rural areas around it. And we are trying to create local jobs through the MSMEs in the small town. And in the ag areas, we are trying to promote the production of fruits and vegetables on barren land through a new technology that my brother has developed and has been scientifically tested. And by the way, we are in Odisha, and Raigad is one of our towns, and we should have some visit there. Kayal Parpati would know Raigad. It's 80% tribal and very poor, but we are not picking the best, we are not picking the worst. And Bolangir also is one of our towns in Orissa, and Chittorgarh in Rajasthan. So it's hard to get things started, but we are very, very optimistic. And the approach is to identify the local problems and the local opportunities, and then bring state, national, and international resources through our networks to resolve those issues, rather than asking the government to do more, but work very closely with the government at the district level. So we have talked to the district collector, the manager of the district industry center, and we are half Babus, so we can easily talk to those people. My family is Babu family, so we know how to talk to them. We are Babus by somehow I'm also an economist, but we are Babus, okay? All of us, okay? So we can easily go and see what a district collector is like, okay? We know many, many of them. So we can deal with them, we are dealing with them, and we are going to have this very aggressive approach. We don't do things ourselves. We are catalytic and facilitative. So if we find that there is an issue in using the rice husks from the farm mills in Shuri, which there is, that they are throwing the effluent in the river and the pond, then we figure out the expert who can solve this problem. So that is the approach. So that's what is one thing that we are practically doing. And I have now broadened it to 5. We need the union government, the state governments, we need the Panchayati Raj, we need the district authorities, because the rural areas are really run by the district collector. And then we need the municipal government in the cities, which we are not talking about, but we would. Okay, that's one point. Second, you mentioned the point about ICT and big data. I am actively involved with groups that are doing ag tech and fintech. And they are all operating on big data with satellite data, monitoring the crops, and they can actually tell you when each plant is wilting, so that you can water on the spot. Okay, and they also fintech how to get better credit assessment, so that the banks can actually make. It's all very new. It's not something that I'm an expert on, but the group is involved in it, and there are several people in this business. So it is coming. Whatever, it's not coming through government effort, it's coming through private efforts. But there are international people and there are national people, and both sides are there. And we will see. This is not going to help the smallholders yet, okay? Because they are actually focused on larger areas where they can monitor. They say we beat drone data, okay? The drones are not capable of giving the quality of data that we can give. So those two, that's a very optimistic thing. And certainly I agree that, we need to stop thinking that the union government alone, the union government's reached its limits, okay? It has reached its limits. And the state governments have also reached their limits. They really cannot get much more out of them. We've got to stop saying that the government they have to set policy, yes. The last point I would say is I'm old enough to remember when the Green Revolution was being brought in. India was a very food short country. Let me tell you, we were very food short. We were dependent upon charity ships arriving in Mumbai with food, because there was no food available. Okay, it was a very food short country. And many of the institutions that you see now, the policies that you see now, were set up at that time. And it's become impossible to change them. It's become impossible to change them. And one of the things was that, of course, the state is, the agriculture is a state subject in the constitution, but the imported technology could only come through the union government. Green Revolution was an imported technology. It could only come through the union government. Plus, we had central planning, and the money was only with the union government. So it overtook the states in terms of any agricultural policy. The states didn't have the money. They had the money and they had the authority. So the agriculture has really been, except in terms of land revenue and all, really been run by the union government. And it's time we gave that up because it's not working. So anyway, those are, on the other points, I have many points, but it's not my job to talk here. So let me just stop and let's see if there's some general discussion. Anybody wants to raise any points? Otherwise, I think it's been very useful, and certainly I've learned a lot. Any final reactions from anyone?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you, Subodh, for this. It has been a really good, fun discussion for me. Thank you, Shubham, Pranita, and Kaibalyapati, if I said your name right. You've had some really exciting and interesting questions for me to think about. And I'm so happy to hear that you feel passionate and engaged about these important topics. Like I mentioned, you are the future of India. And it is important that you are involved in some of these things, and thinking about some of these issues. Please, thank you for this opportunity once again, and I'm happy to stay in touch with anybody or have more in-depth discussion at a later date if anybody is passionate about talking about any, like the book some more, or even in general your thoughts and opinions.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. It's a great thing to have you. And I think the whole idea of getting young people directly into the picture with an expert, I think by now it's clear that it works, it helps everybody. And even if you don't become an ag expert, even if you don't, you get a private sector job, the thing is that okay? And the thing is that your knowledge spreads to others. So we need informed people, because I keep saying that nonprofit institutions will ultimately have to have a key role, and the thinking and knowledge must be there. So I'm personally happy to see that this experiment is working out. And as I told you, we will have a separate discussion after this session is recorded for many more younger people who aren't, like in their BA or MA still, to come and listen to everything and have a chance to talk about it. So, okay, so let's end it here. Thank you all very much. To the viewers, I'll be back with another expert or some young people soon. Till then, bye everybody. Let's end the recording here.